So as we're looking at 14G, I'm highlighting the word Kolōnos, which we're now accustomed to translate as tumulus, that is to say, a hill piled up that contains the body of a hero, and that is very prominent in some way. For example, it's covered with white stucco. That's one way to imagine the Kolōnos, which we translate as a tumulus. And I'm fascinated with the way, whenever such a Kolōnos is described, the way the world of nature and the world of the artificial, what we humans construct or organize around nature, how those two things, nature and culture, let's call it, are in perfect harmony. So here, the way the elm trees that surround the Kolōnos are planted is, of course, generated by the nymphs, local goddesses. It's as if the forces of nature were cooperating with the forces of culture, of the artifice of arranging a beautiful garden.
Because the Kolōnos itself is a natural as well as a man-made feature, right? Or
well,
I mean, it can be.
You can't tell because in some situations you actually hear of people building the tomb
Right.
and heaping up stones.
Right.
And then the result can be a Kolōnos, but you're right, in a way, you're already looking at something that is probably an elevation.
Right.
And certainly that's the case with the tomb of Achilles, which is already situated at a headland. Mm-hmm. And we imagine a commanding view of the Hellespont, both to the north and to the west.
Right.
And so, in a sense, it's maybe a special landmark on top of what is already a landmark,
Right,
which is a hill. And again, it's a beautiful exercise in metonymy where whatever you notice sticking out in the horizon is already a Kolōnos, and then when you approach it, it's kind of a blend of nature and culture.
Right.
But I love that question, yeah. And here, even the way the elm trees behave and when they flourish and when they wilt is in sympathy with the body of the cult hero who is hidden within this Kolōnos.
We also have those elm trees in the sixth book of the Iliad, right?
Yes, and they happen to be landmarks for the tomb of Andromache's father.
Eëtion, yeah.
So that makes it even better.
Right.
So as we look at this passage G, these are some of the ideas. So many key words are prominent here, like hora, how certain aspects of the growth of these elm trees is a function of their hora, or whether they're in season or out of season. And then there's that word pathos, which we're now translating as life experience or experience, always larger than life in the case of heroes. And here it's the pathos of protesilaos. And then the idea that there's prosperity connected by way of just making contact with this beautiful place, whether it's physical or mental. One last word in this passage that, of course, I have to emphasize is Sēma. There it is. Here, you can simply translate it as tomb, but again, we can read out of it so many of those other meanings that we have experienced.
I was just wondering about, so our readers who are new to this kind of reading, I'm thinking about this passage and the way that it helps us learn about these words as a system and the way that you can figure out what a word might mean in relation to other words, and how this particular passage helps us see the relationship between Kolōnos and Sēma.
Yes, and the relationship is spelled out here in ways that it's sometimes not spelled out in the poetry. And that, in general, is one of the bonuses we will be getting as we start reading more and more prose. And this piece of prose kind of sticks out for us because we're so used to reading what I already defined in the introduction as the archaic period, that is to say, from as far back as we can go up to the middle of the 5th century. Now we're leaving BCE and we're going to CE. Not only that, it's now the early 3rd century CE, so that's a lot of years between what we are accustomed to reading and what we're reading now. And in this prose, there are all sorts of things spelled out that are really not spelled out in the poetry. And so you're quite right.
But it participates in the poetic vocabulary
Oh,
in
it still
a beautifully
participates.
systematic way, right?
And it's systematic, it's participatory, you're quite right, it extends from the poetry,
Right.
but because it's prose, there's freedom to spell things out the way things aren't always spelled out in the poetry. And it helps that the later you go in studying ancient Greek heroes, because we're now approaching what experts call late antiquity. The later you go, the more what used to be secrets, mysteries, is spelled out.
They get to be explained.
And they are spelled out because people are in danger of losing the tradition. And it's a truism that when a tradition weakens, the tradition points to itself more often and more ostentatiously, and that makes things easier for us, although we have this feeling of sadness that you're seeing the last gasp of a very rich system of communication.
It has to give you more semata.
Yes, it is just overloaded with semata almost. I shouldn't say overloaded because we need it.
Yes, exactly. It's very helpful.
So is that the system of literature longing for itself? What's happening?
Well, I like the way you say it. In a way, tradition is that. It's a system that keeps on going. And all too often in modern usage, we think of tradition as something that stands in the way, that stifles creativity. But in the ancient Greek song culture and what comes out of the ancient Greek song culture, it's just the opposite. It's a way of keeping the system alive. And you might even say it is the system.
It enriches your experience, the tradition. We think
Yes.
of tradition as an obstacle and a weight on our shoulders, but for them, it enriches your view of the world.
Yes, and I guess it's still a weight. People still feel a responsibility,
Right.
but it's still a system of communication rather than the opposite.
Yeah.
And it's still something that enhances how people communicate.